Part 95. Go to Wufeng Mountain to see bellflower flowers and then open communication with each other. The next day, Yi Yang got up and put on his clothes before he had time to wash up. Jun Yi, who had gotten off in the early morning, came to Jinghong Hall. Jun Yi looked at Yi Yang, who was confident in the sun, and was fascinated, as if he wanted to see him enough at one time. Is there something dirty on my face? Yi Yang saw that Jun Yi had been staring at his face, and hurriedly wiped his face. No. Jun Yi reached out, grabbed Yi Yang's hand, and gently stroked the slender, white hands. Yi Yang felt numb from his touch. He quickly pulled back his hand and said embarrassedly, "Your Majesty, is there something?" In general, Jun Yi rarely came to him at this time, because at this time, Jun Yi was always there, handling political affairs. I heard that the bellflowers on Wufeng Mountain are all blooming. And they are very beautiful. I have nothing to do recently, so I will take you to Wufeng Mountain to breathe. Jun Yi was dissatisfied with Yi Yang's reaction. He stretched out his hand and took Yi Yang's hand, letting go hold lightly in hand. When Yi Yang heard that he was going to leave the palace, he didn't care about Jun Yi holding his hand, and hurriedly greeted Xiao Doubting and told him to prepare what he was going to bring out of the palace. Seeing him so happy, Jun Yi's eyes that were like a deep pool showed a deep reluctance. Yi Yang, who rarely went out to play in the palace, didn't notice the emotions in Jun Yi's eyes because he was excited. He instructed Xiao Doubting to bring more food, and then have a picnic on the mountain. When they were ready, the group changed out of the heavy palace dresses, put on light silk white clothes and went to Wufeng Mountain. Wufeng Mountain, as the name of the mountain, saw 5 mountain peaks next to each other, like 5 divine beasts lying dormant on the ground, guarding the holy city at all times. The top of the mountain is covered with bellflowers, and the purple flowers are endless, dyeing the whole mountain purple. Yi Yang sat in the carriage, lifted the curtain of the carriage, and looked at the bellflower flowers all over the mountain, which was pleasing to the eyes, and finally relieved his troubled heart for a long time. Jun Yi suddenly hugged him from behind. His chest was tightly pressed against his back, his head was buried in his neck, and he was obsessed with smelling his unique body fragrance. Yi Yang was disturbed by the breath of his neck, and leaned against Jun Yi with his whole body relaxed. At this moment, what a concubine! Now he just wants to embrace Jun Yi's tenderness. As for the future, take it one step at a time. Jun Yi kissed Yi Yang's neck, sucked it fascinated and started to untie Yi Yang's clothes. I don't know if it's Yi Yang's illusion, Jun Yi is a little crazy today. When he was on the rise, 2 drops of warm water suddenly fell on his smooth back, as if lava dripped on his back, burning his back. He wanted to turn back, but Jun Yi pressed his head tightly on the seat, preventing him from turning back. He vaguely guessed that it was Jun Yi's tears, but he was not sure. The carriage followed the trail all the way to the top of the mountain. The 2 neatly dressed people got off the carriage and looked at the purple bellflowers on the top of the mountain. They felt that all their troubles were scattered with the wind. The guard behind wanted to follow in the footsteps of the 2, but Jun Yi turned back to look at Yun Qing and the others with an indifferent expression. You stay where you are. And the imperial concubine and I want to walk alone. He took Yi Yang's hand, walk forward. Yun Qing and the others didn't dare to disobey Jun Yi's words, so they had to stand there and watch the backs of the 2 drift away. The wind blew gently, bringing bursts of fragrance. Yi Yang took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and immersed himself in the fragrance. Jun Yi tilted his head, looked at Yi Yang at this time, took a breath, and his heart was pounding, as if it was about to jump out of his heart. Yi Yang was so charming at this time. The warm sunlight shone on his face, shining brightly. His face was carved with distinct features. His angular face was very handsome. The shadow seemed to quiver gently like a butterfly feather with the breath. Jun Yi tightened his hand unconsciously, and squeezed Yi Yang's hand even harder. There was a severe pain in his heart, as if two big hands were pinching his heart and ravaging him wantonly. Yi Yang's hand was so painfully pinched by Jun Yi that he opened his eyes and looked at Jun Yi suspiciously. Jun Yi didn't dare to look directly into Yi Yang's eyes. He hurriedly lowered his eyelids and changed the subject. The scenery here is so beautiful. Yi Yang only felt that something was wrong with Jun Yi today. He tilted his head and looked at Jun Yi, wondering what happened to this person already. But he didn't ask. Looked at a pavilion in the distance, and said to Jun Yi with a smile, "Let's go to that pavilion and sit for a while. When we're hungry, we'll lay a blanket next to it and put it on eating food." Enjoying the scenery and eating delicious food. In fact, picnicking was something Yi Yang always wanted to do before he crossed the road. But he couldn't find a suitable person to accompany him for a picnic, so he never had the opportunity. Now it's hard to wait for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Naturally, he wants to have a picnic and experience the happiness that a couple should have. Jun Yi didn't answer, he just stared at Yi Yang with a bright smile on his face. As if to burn his smile into his heart, the two walked into the pavilion and saw a stone table and 4 stone benches in the middle of the pavilion. Yi Yang was not polite at all. He sat on the stone bench and said with a smile, "If I knew earlier, I would bring a set of chess, so that I can enjoy the bellflower flowers all over the mountains and fields while playing chess." Jun Yi didn't have the slightest interest. He sat opposite Yi Yang and stared at Yi Yang for a moment, which made Yi Yang panic. "Your Majesty, just say what you have to say. You stare at me like this, and I panic." Yi Yang was stared at by Jun Yi, who was behaving abnormally. Jun Yi hesitated for a long time, then sighed softly, turned his head to one side, looked at the bellflower flowers fluttering in the wind outside the pavilion and said softly, "Yi Yang, let's go." Huh? Yi Yang was stunned for a while, not knowing what he said. "What does you go mean?" Jun Yi took a deep breath and said slowly, "Go down the mountain from the west. There is a fast horse I prepared for you at the foot of the mountain. There is a package on the horse's back, and the package contains enough gold for the rest of your life as silver treasure." He tried his best to keep his voice normal, but only when he spoke did he find that his voice trembled. Yi Yang was completely stunned in place. Jun Yi actually let him leave the palace? If Jun Yi had said this last year, he would have jumped up and shouted, "Long live the emperor!" with absolute joy. But why did he hear this now, not only without a trace of joy, but was so distressed that he was almost out of breath? Especially when he thought of the tears that Jun Yi shed in the carriage just now, his heart hurt like suffocation. Jun Yi didn't dare to look at Yi Yang, because he was afraid of seeing the smile on Yi Yang's face. He continued, "Let's go before I regret it, or I'm afraid I will regret it." He repeated this decision last night. After thinking about it all night, thinking of letting Yi Yang go, he was so distressed that he was about to suffocate, but thinking of Yi Yang's disgust for him, and not wanting Yi Yang to hate him for the rest of his life, so he chose to fulfill Yi Yang and let Yi Yang pursue what he wanted life. Yi Yang stared blankly at Jun Yi, who was surrounded by sadness. His heart seemed to be gouged out with a knife, and his soul trembled in pain. He never thought that just looking at the person in front of him with a sad expression, his heart hurts so much that he can't help himself. "Let's go. Don't look back when you're gone, or I'm afraid I won't be able to help chasing you." Jun Yi never dared to look at Yi Yang, because he knew that if he saw Yi Yang, he would be reluctant to let go. Why? Yi Yang didn't understand. Clearly Jun Yi also likes him. Why should he let him go? The problem is that he doesn't want to leave now, because as long as he thinks of not seeing Jun Yi in the days to come, he is so sad that he loses any fighting spirit. In such a life, it is better to guard the person in front of you, at least you can see it often to relieve the loneliness in your heart. Jun Yi looked at Yi Yang, and wanted to put a smile on his lips. But he tried twice without success, so he had to give up and replied word by word, "Since you are not happy with me, why don't I let you go after what you want? You are so talented. You will be better off without me. In the future, you can marry a wife you really like, have children, and enjoy the happiness of a family with children and grandchildren around your knees." He didn't want to let go, but he didn't want Yi Yang to be unhappy for the rest of his life. Since he couldn't give Yi Yang the happiness he wanted, he had to let go. As Yi Yang said, "Since you don't love, why not let go? Dragging on like this will make each other unhappy." Seeing Yi Yang unhappy with the rest of his life, why not let him go and find his happiness? Yi Yang stared blankly at Jun Yi with a sad expression and tears in his eyes. His heart was sour and astringent. He did not expect that people who used to be high in the past would also have such a vulnerable side, and his heart was instantly broken. He tried his best to use a light tone to resolve the current sadness and depression. "Your Majesty, you can't be so ruthless. You will abandon me if you eat me clean. Is it too cruel for you to be like this?" He thought that when Yi Yang learned that he was willing to let him go, he would definitely jump up with joy. But who is the one who said he abandoned him now? "But why didn't you let me touch you before?" Jun Yi's eyes were bloodshot, and he questioned Yi Yang. "That's because I am very selfish. And I can't share a lover with so many people at the same time." Looking at the tears in Jun Yi's eyes, Yi Yang decided not to care so much. At least the person in front of him really liked him. As for the future, what do you want to do in the long run? At least you can live happily now. Because when he thought that he would never see Jun Yi, his heart was empty. And his whole life was meaningless. "You lied. If you really cared about me, you wouldn't persuade me to take the rain and the dew." It was because Yi Yang always advised him to take the rain and the dew, and he knew that Yi Yang didn't like him at all. Because no one would want to see the person you love sleeps with someone else. Being complained, Yi Yang was so angry, he scolded his face. "It's not that you insisted on making me the thankless young master of the imperial concubine. I will perform the duties of the imperial concubine in this position. If I don't persuade you or in the rain and the dew, will those bastards who want to be dissatisfied let me go?" The scolded Jun Yi was like a child who did something wrong. And now he realizes that he thought he was good for Yi Yang, but in the end, he found out that he did something wrong. A very stupid thing. "Are you really pleased with me?" Jun Yi was a little worried and asked carefully, pulling Yi Yang's hand. Yi Yang looked at Jun Yi with a cautious face, his nose was sour, nodded, and replied earnestly, "I am happy with you. I am so happy that I am willing to share you with others." When Jun Yi got the most unexpected answer, his heart that had been in agony for a long time was instantly surrounded by the surging happiness. At this moment, he seemed to have obtained the whole world, and he was happy and comfortable. He grabbed Yi Yang's hand tightly and said seriously, "Yi Yang, I gave you a chance, but you won't leave. Even if you regret it in the future, I will not let you go. Talk later." As long as Jun Yi doesn't treat him too much, he shouldn't think about escaping from the palace. Seeing that he was silent, Jun Yi was deeply afraid that he would regret it, so he stood up and said, "Let's go back." "But we just came. Yi Yang's picnic hasn't been eaten yet, so why is he willing to go back like this?" "I remembered that I have very important things to do. Next time. I will let you have a good time next time." Jun Yi pulled Yi Yang, who was unwilling to leave, and hurriedly walked towards Yun Qing and others. Seeing that Jun Yi was in a hurry, Yi Yang thought that there was really something important to do, so he hurriedly followed in Jun Yi's footsteps and asked, "What is the important thing? Is it serious?" "Very serious. It is very serious, and it is serious enough to affect the happy life of the rest of my life." Seeing that he was in a hurry, Yi Yang didn't ask any more questions and stepped up to the carriage. Back in the carriage, there was still a faint fishy smell inside. Yi Yang recalled the absurdity in the carriage just now, and blushed involuntarily. Especially when he thought that Jun Yi had cried for himself. His heart was sour and sweet, and he took the initiative to return to the palm that had been holding him tightly. Jun Yi felt the strength of Yi Yang's hand. A happy smile raised on the corner of his mouth, and then his back lip covered Yi Yang's lips, grabbing the honey that belonged to him. The kiss was getting deeper and deeper, and he saw that the gun was about to go off. Suddenly the carriage stopped. And Yi Yang was so frightened that he hurriedly pushed away the person who wanted to take off his clothes. Jun Yi, who was pushed away, was a little dissatisfied and turned to vent his anger on Yun Qing outside. "What happened?" Yun Qing's calm voice came, "Go back to the emperor. Someone fell into the water." As soon as he heard that someone fell into the water, Yi Yang immediately lifted the curtain of the car, looked at Yun Qing outside the carriage, and scolded, "If someone falls into the water, hurry up and save them. What the hell is so indifferent?" Yun Qing, who was scolded, was not unhappy at all, and he respectfully replied, "Back to the imperial concubine. My subordinates have already asked Yun Bo and Yun Song to save people." Hearing that someone had come to rescue, Yi Yang put down his heart. When he got out of the carriage, he realized that they had already descended the mountain. They were at the foot of the mountain. There was a large river beside the road to go. Looking ahead, the turbulent river made Yi Yang unable to see where the drowning person was. Just when he thought that the drowning person could not be saved, Yun Bai rescued a woman first, and then swam to the shore, while Yun Song continued to swim forward. The woman who was rescued didn't care that she was soaking wet. She lay on the bank and cried out in tears, "Please, you must save my son, please." In the old woman's pleading voice. Yun Song finally rescued another man who fell into the water, and then dragged him ashore with great difficulty. When Yun Qing saw this, he quickly asked another guard to help Yun Song. With the joint efforts of two strong guards to rescue, the other person who fell into the water was finally dragged ashore. When the woman saw that they rescued her son, she kowtowed to Yun Bo gratefully, "Thank you, thank you." Yun Bo was about to help the woman when the woman hurriedly stood up and ran towards the young man who fell into the water to go. However, when she saw the young man with a pale face like a dead man, her nerves were tense, and her expression showed fear and despair. Yun Song probed the young man's carotid artery, then shook his head and said to the woman, "Please, condolences." After hearing the condolences, the woman's eyes turned black, and she felt like the sky was falling, and she ran on the young man, weeping loudly. There was an air of despair all over his body. Seeing this, Yi Yang hurried towards the woman, and Jun Yi behind him had to follow Yi Yang's footsteps. Yi Yang came to the woman and pulled the sad woman away with brute force. He squatted beside the young man. He saw that the young man was handsome and even looked familiar. But saving people was the most important thing right now, so he didn't have time to think about the young man. Why look familiar? He flattened the young man's body, folded his hands, knelt beside the young man, and placed his folded hands on the young man's chest, which attracted the surprised eyes of everyone. The woman looked at the lifeless young man. Her eyes were dull, and her tears fell one by one. She didn't even care that Yi Yang did excessive actions to her son. At this moment, her heart has died with her son. Yi Yang What are you doing? Jun Yi didn't know what Yi Yang wanted to do. Yi Yang wanted to explain, but he didn't use CPR to save people, and he didn't know if he could save the young man. So he chose not to explain, because he didn't want to give the woman hope and let the woman fall into despair. He quickly pressed the young man's chest. Time passed by minute by minute. It was only a minute or so. Yi Yang felt as if 10 minutes had passed. Looking at the lifeless young man, despair shrouded all around him. He wants to give up. The woman on the side came back to her senses at this time. She stared at Yi Yang blankly, then suddenly stood up and ran towards the river. No, she's going to commit suicide, Yun Qing shouted, running towards the woman quickly, grabbing the woman who wanted to jump into the river. Let me go, let me die. The woman looked desperate and lost her will to survive. At this moment, she just wanted to die with her son. Cough, cough. Just as the two of them were pulling, a coughing sound suddenly sounded, as if the most beautiful music in the world, shocked everyone's spirits. All the people present looked at the young man who had died but suddenly spit out a few mouthfuls of water with a look of horror on their faces. The cold air was blowing from their backs. And they looked at Yi Yang with awe. The woman looked at her son who should have died but suddenly came back to life. She was ecstatic. She flew to Yi Yang, knelt down and kowtowed. Thank God for saving my son's life. Thank God for saving my son's life. Don't call me a god. I'm just an ordinary person. Yi Yang hurriedly explained that he shouldn't carry the name of a god on his back. It wouldn't be fun if the family members of the princes and nobles died and came to him for help. The young man opened his confused eyes and looked at everything in front of him. And then saw his mother kowtow all the time. He also naively followed the woman's knees and kowtowed to Yi Yang. Thank God for saving my son's life. Thank God for saving my son's life. Thank God to save my son's life. Huh? Everyone looked at the young man with doubts in their eyes. The woman looked excited at the moment. She hugged the soaked young man. Seeing Yi Yang and others all showing doubtful eyes, she explained with tears in her eyes, "Don't laugh, my son. He had a fever when he was young and burned out. His brain and intelligence are only 5 years old. What a pity." Yi Yang looked at the young man. He was clearly handsome, but he was a fool. If his intelligence was normal, he might have married and started a business. It's getting late. Auntie should hurry up and bring your esteemed son home to change clothes. Yi Yang stood up and looked at the young man, feeling familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen him. Benefactor. I can't repay you for saving my son's life now. Please also tell me your name. I will come to visit you in person later. Thank you for saving my son's life. The woman looked sincere and hoped that Yi Yang could told his name. Thank you, you don't have to. It's not worth the effort. Yi Yang looked polite. You also call this a labor of hands? Jun Yi silently complained in his heart, if this life-saving grace is all a gesture of effort, then what kind of grace is greater than heaven? Young master, if you don't tell me your name, this woman will always kneel here to thank you. The woman's face was stubborn, and her face faded away with a firm look. Although the young man was in his early 20s, he had only the intelligence of a 5-year-old child. He obediently knelt beside the woman and did not say a word. Yi Yang knew that the other party would not leave if he didn't say his name. He didn't want the two of them to catch a cold because of the cold, so he said, I am Yi Yang. Yi Yang from the Holy City. When she got the name, the woman said excitedly, the women of the people have already remembered that in my heart. I will definitely come to visit and thank you in the future. Hurry home and change your clothes. Although it's summer now, it's still a little cold at night. Don't catch a cold. Yi Yang said to the peasant woman that she wanted to come to the house to thank you. He didn't take it to heart. After all, his family's business is big now. And he doesn't care about the gratitude of others. At this moment, he finally realized the feeling that a cloud doesn't like money. He is too rich to like it now. Because he finds that he has so much money that he doesn't know what to buy. After the woman thanked Yi Yang repeatedly, she helped her son to leave. After the two mothers and sons were far away, Jun Yi suddenly hugged Yi Yang from behind, and asked with a smile, "My dear imperial concubine, how did you save the dead?" When Jun Yi asked about this, the surrounding guards all pricked up their ears, wondering why Yi Yang could save the dead. Let me make it clear first, this is not called resuscitating the dead, but just using cardiopulmonary resuscitation for the person in hypoxic shock to stimulate the other party's heart, so that the heart that has stopped beating can be beat again, so as to rescue the person who was temporarily in shock. A drowning person can be saved within a cup of tea, because drowning within a cup of tea is only anoxic shock. And irreversible brain death will occur no matter how long it takes. Oxygen shock, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, brain death. Jun Yi didn't understand a sentence. The only thing he understood was that CPR could be used to save the drowning person during a cup of tea time after drowning. The surrounding guards also had the same thoughts as Jun Yi. After learning a trick, they secretly geared up and decided that if they encountered a drowning person in the future, they would try Yi Yang's method. This little episode did not stop them from returning to the palace. Yi Yang and Jun Yi got on the carriage again and walked towards the palace. Returning to Jinghong Hall, Yi Yang, who had not had a picnic, looked uninterested. As soon as he lay down, Jun Yi rushed towards him with a smile in his eyes.